I asked the bright minds on Marvel Snap Twitter what their hottest takes were about Marvel Snap, so let's check them out. District X, Weird World, and Mindscape are some of the most skill testing locations in the game. I think this is true. I think District X, Weird World, and Mindscape are incredibly skill testing. District X requires you to work with what you're given. Weird World requires you to work in the confines of what your opponent is playing, and Mindscape lets you prep for what your situation is going to be if it goes off on turn 6. That said, I think the reason people don't like them is because, not that they're not skill testing, but mostly when people play card games, they have an idea of what they want to do with the experience. They want to play their specific deck. They have an idea of the thing they want to accomplish, and they want to try to accomplish that thing, whether that be, winning or just accomplishing a combo of some kind. So I think that while they are skill testing, they're not necessarily testing the skills that most players want to be tested on. They want to be tested on how their deck matches up in other decks, how they can navigate matchups. They want to basically play the game as a base level game, as opposed to with the additional complexities of these, let's be honest, significantly complex locations. Game is more fun when Mr. Negative is good. I don't know how you get to here, but I would guess the logic is that the game is more fun when there is a high roll deck in the meta, when there is something to keep people on their toes and make people really specifically need to answer it. And I don't necessarily disagree, because Mr. Negative's play patterns are very binary, and so I think it's a good deck to test your base skill at snapping. You can really figure out, like, okay, they didn't play the Mr. Negative, so now I need to get aggressive when they didn't play the Mr. Negative. I need to get aggressive when they didn't play Zabu or Psylocke even. So I think I'm okay with this take. I'm all right with it. You can survive on this take. It will feed you in dire times. The Infinaut needs a buff in power to 25 plus. If High Evo's Hulk can be played on turn 6 with no restrictions and can be a 620 as well. Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I don't necessarily think it needs to be 25 plus, but the Infinaut at base was a much larger creature than he currently is now, right? Like, and there are several cards like this. If you can believe this, early in the game's existence, Destroyer at 616 was just like a card you could play into a lane and then win it, right? Your game plan was to Professor X one lane and Destroyer another, and he was just big enough to win it. And that seems just absolutely fanciful now in a world of Dark Hawks and High Evolutionary Hulks, and it's just not going to happen anymore. So the Infinaut was created in those conditions, and I think it's not unreasonable to say that his restriction is so ridiculous that there should be more of a reward for it. I don't hate it. I just think the question would be, is that the kind of deck you want to be around? Do you want Infinaut decks to be extremely powerful? And if not, I think maybe you want to pump the brakes on making the Infinaut very, very good. I think he sort of promotes a little bit of a binary playstyle, where the two ways to either make him good are you do magic stuff and then die to Legion or Scarlet Witch, or you end up doing something like Lady Sith Ghost Rider, which, like, no one likes that stuff, I think, or very few people would be happy if those were the dominant decks in the metagame. So I think I'm comfortable with him being where he is, but the overall point that he was designed in a different era of Marvel Snap and now just things are way stronger, I think that's fair. This next one is two parts. There are two different people who within 30 seconds of each other posted diametrically opposing opinions. So Shang-Chi is the worst designed card with the lowest skill floor and should be reconceived and redesigned from the ground up. And then about 30 seconds before that, a different person, Shang-Chi is bait and great for the game. You should almost never run it, and 90% do. So Shang-Chi is a sort of meta-defining card in the most basic of senses. It's always been relevant. It's always been around. And I think the overall effect it has on the game is good. the overall effect that Shang-Chi has on the game is to say there is a counter to just putting the biggest number on the board. Without Shang-Chi being around, decks would be all about putting the biggest number on the board. And we kind of saw what a meta without Shang-Chi would look like in the first few days after the Magic change when she became a 3-2. It was just all combo decks. And then very quickly, Shang-Chi decks and Enchantress decks arrived to say, hey, no, stop this. Stop doing what you're doing. Cease. You must cease and desist. And I think that's good. I think it is actually good that Shang-Chi is around to police the meta. I don't necessarily know if he has to cost 4. That additional Zabu synergy is a little bit weird for me. But I think it's good that a card like that exists and is playable. America Chavez doesn't actually thin your deck. America Chavez does thin your deck, you just have to pay a cost for it. So America Chavez makes it so you're more likely to draw specific cards on turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, but then you have no chance at drawing them on turn 6. So the way to think about America Chavez is the more you want something specific on turn 1, the more you want to run America Chavez. This also applies to, like, if you have a specific combo, right? Like, if you need to have specifically 2 cards in hand by turn 5, or you're going to die, or your deck's not going to do what it is, then you want to run America Chavez. But other than that, I do think that she can be overrun, but I think more people make the mistake of not running her than people make the mistake of running her. And I think the reason this sentiment exists is because it really sucks to be playing a deck and then just be like, I'm so live if I draw this card on turn 6, all I need is to top deck this. And then America Chavez shows up and you're like, oh my God, I put this card in my deck. So I do think that she's a good card. I don't think she goes in every deck. And I think that is, you know, I'm both sidesing it a little bit here. I've actually thought about this a fair bit. I think there's like a scale of content creators where like Specimen has her up here, and then Lambie series has her up here, and then I'm like right below that, and then there's like D-Money who cut Chavez from bounce, and then Dara who just thinks the card is not good at all. I think that like that is the sliding scale of content creators. I would put myself, I would say I run her more than most people do. And I would say that I think I'm correct to do that. Obviously, I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't think that. So Chavez, just, you know, take it with a grain of salt. Like, prepare with caution. Understand that there are going to be some games where you're going to feel bad about running the card. But it's a lot easier to notice when she's bad than to notice when she's good. Because when she's good is so marginal and just feels like normally playing the game. So generally speaking, I am a pro Chavez. I'm taking a pro Chavez stance. Galactus did nothing wrong and is so beatable that he's not even in the meta discussion. Galactus did a lot of things wrong. I think the main thing that Galactus did wrong, and we actually touched on this a little bit earlier in the video when we talked about what players expect and what they want when they queue up for a game of Marvel Snap. What are they looking for? What are they trying to accomplish? I would suggest that what Galactus did wrong was turn the game from Marvel Snap into Marvel Galactus. Nothing else mattered. It didn't matter whether you were a combo deck or a control deck or whatever. The only thing that mattered was, did they do the Galactus thing? And you were very rarely beating it if they did. And I think that is the major issue that Galactus has. And it's why I find that many people who compare cards to Galactus are almost missing the point of why Galactus was such a problem. Because there are a lot of cards that are similar to Galactus in terms of at least power level, but there are no cards that are similar to Galactus in terms of the drastic effect he has on the game state. Galactus completely inverts how decks are built in Marvel Snap. Not just how you play, but how decks are built. Old Spider-Man, you'd play Spider-Man, you know, it would suck, right? But you could Doctor Doom stuff in there. You could Jeff stuff in there. You could play Ultron after playing a Patriot and get stuff onto the Spider-Man lane, right? Like, you can do stuff. With Galactus, it was very specifically, you only care about one location, which is the opposite of how decks are supposed to be built in this game, because you are supposed to build to win 2 out of 3 locations. And Galactus inverting that meant so that it was just a deck building decision. You lost in deck building. It wasn't even a question of, you know, whether or not you could do anything about it. It was just a question of if you even had the cards in your deck to do anything about it, which is why he was not a problem before they nerfed Arrow, because Arrow was in basically every deck. She was a perfect counter to Galactus. He could basically never get off the ground when she was in every single deck. Arrow gets nerfed. Suddenly, Galactus is everywhere because now everyone's not running a free counter for it. And that is the kind of thing that you just don't want to make mandatory. You want to be able to nerf cards like Arrow that are obvious balance problems. You want any card that would counter Galactus in that way would run into the same issues. So the issue then becomes Galactus. Is it a good thing that this card only loses if you have these other specific cards to counter it? And I know people love listing how many ways there are to counter Galactus, but like half the cards they list are like 50-50s. Like, oh, you counter Galactus with Cosmo. What if you miss? And so that's why I like the Galactus redesign. It adds another lever upon which you can combat Galactus. Hey Anthony, Best Tano here, internet's busiest content format thief. I really enjoyed doing this little impression of Anthony Fantano's Let's Argue series, but for Marvel Snap. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you did, please remember, like and subscribe, leave a comment if you enjoyed it. I really do want to see if people want more of these videos. I'd obviously love to make them. I had a ton of fun making this one. Thank you so much for making it all the way through that video. I will see you in the next one.